Hey, everyone. Hey, before we get started, I want to tell you about a new series we're starting at the New Stack. It's called the Tech Founder Odyssey, and it is about that journey that technical founders go on when starting a company. This is really about their stories, their journey, the adventures, the tragedies, the people they meet, the scary things that they come to meet along the way. It's really all here for you to learn about what these companies are like when they get started, how people grow them, how they manage them, how they manage their lives along with the journey. We've had some great feedback on Twitter already with some great questions, and we're going to bring those into the show. We hope you enjoy it. Again, it's the Tech Founder Odyssey on the New Stack Makers. You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more conversations and articles, please visit thenewstack.io. Now on with the show. Hey everyone, here for another episode of the New Stack Makers. We are doing a series on founders, technical founders in particular. And Tina Huang is our guest today. Tina is founder and CTO of Transposit. Tina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So in these interviews, we like to try to get a sense of, how you got into programming, how you got into this world of just being a developer. Maybe you could take us back to when you started writing code. What were those early days? Where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, like many people who started coding around when I did, which must have been in the early 90s, I was at home just playing around with a computer in high school or middle school. I forget when. But I often talk about how various people have their paths into coding. For a lot of people I talked to, it was through video games and entertainment, which was not the case for me. It is not a lie to say that what got me excited about coding was automation. Now, you're probably going to think to yourself, what middle school kid likes automation? And for me at the time, I was just coding my GeoCities website. And the website was for no purpose at all. It was just, my own fun. But the ability to tell a computer to do something, even if it was just write a few lines of code that I didn't want to have to hand type, that felt to me the way that I imagine why everyone loves Jetsons and Rosie the Robot. That takes something that everyone hates to do and everyone thinks is, just mundane, like doing your laundry. I mean, I think that's why Rosie still continues to be the dream robot everyone wants, is just make me a robot that will fold my laundry for me. Because it's that delight you can get where something that feels so inhuman to have to do, that you have this automation, but it doesn't take away from all of the joys of everything that you like to do.
So have you roboticized your house at all?
No, barely at all. That's the irony. I have a few different... I enjoy things like my Nest. I like being able to turn on my heat before I show up at home, being able to turn on my lights on the side of my house. But other than that, I don't do the Alexa or Siri and all of those devices.
Computers of a different kind these days are getting automated. I guess we'll see more of that. But in your work at Transposit, tell us about that. Tell us about Transposit and what is your role there now that you're a founder.
Yeah, so what I feel very fortunate that as a founder, you basically get to make your job what you want it to be. Yeah. The flip side of it is you also end up picking up and dealing with whatever needs to happen at all times, but you get some of both of those. And so for me, I spend a lot of time still coding and doing technical architecture. what we're
Uh,
building at Transposit really resonates with a few I'd say two themes in my life and my career that are really valuable. One is, the love of automation, the love of building things for developers. And the other is finding ways of making technology enhance the human experience and not detract from it. And so I've always been swimming upstream against the tide when I worked at companies like Google and Twitter, where, the tagline for Google News back then was news by robots. The ideal in their mind was, how do you get robots to do all of news reporting? And that is funny because now I think we have a different opinion of this, but at the time it was popular to think news by robots would be more factual, be more democratic. That was the initial viewpoint of it. But I worked on a project that was looking at how you can use algorithms to do the first pass of curation for human editors to go in and then add that human touch to news. I've always liked
mm,
long form journalism and that human touch to information.
mm, hmm That's really neat to hear. And I know that you were pretty active in Google News. You also were pretty active on Blogger, as I understand. And I totally got into RSS around 2003, 2004. And I was just obsessed with it because I could look at so many different posts so quickly through a newsreader. And it really then, I think, really was served, that newsreader, I believe, served as catalyst for blogging. And that's really a form of really expression more than anything else. I mean, we use a CMS platform from WordPress, which was originally, I believe, intended to be a blogging platform. But I don't really consider what we do as blogging. I think we do more reporting. And so I'm just curious about, did you really love RSS? Did you find it fascinating? Did it influence you at all in your thinking and stuff? Because it sure did me, but I'm curious about your perspective.
Yeah, for me, I've always had a love and hate relationship with RSS. The There's a natural ebb and flow with humans and information streams. So you have products like RSS that allow you to consume massive, massive amounts of information. You have new platforms that generate tons of new user generated content. But then very quickly you become overwhelmed. And that
Mm,
actually was the history of blogging. Blogging started as a way to allow humans to curate links on the web so that you knew what to look at. In the early days of the web, there weren't that many options, but then suddenly it became too much. But then at some point, there's too many blogs and you don't know who to follow and you've recreated that
yeah.
problem and now you're needing that curation again. And so there's actually an interesting synergy or analogy with what we see at Transposit with the role of operators. People actually use Slack in many ways, almost as an RSS reader for
Yes.
all
Yeah.
kinds of system information. And so, the first time you plug in an integration and you maybe have GitHub posting commits into Slack, that seems very exciting. You have exactly that experience that you described, Alex, where look how fast I can consume this information in the background of Slack. Someone adds the second integration, third. Before you know it, you have alerts coming in left and right on Slack. And suddenly you're inundated with information because it was information designed for the consumption by machines, not at the human scale. And so at that point, similar to the role of blogs, you need that next layer of curation on top of it, right? Like, how do you allow people to annotate that information and allow people to choose what to subscribe to and at what level? And that's one of the areas that we are hoping to tackle with Transposit.
This is the this is the this is the issue of the day, that overwhelming amount of information, and how do you curate it? And as a reporter, I mean, I worked in newspapers in my early career, and I remember going to my full-time job at the Augusta Chronicle, and over the first week they said, we would just like you to read the wires for a few days. And so I just spent hours and hours reading stories from Knight Ridder and the Associated Press. And even that was a lot of information because there were just so many stories that you could read. And now the stories are different, aren't they, for engineers? They're data streams. There's so many notifications that they get. And so that makes sense from what I hear from you talking about, that overwhelming amount of information that you're trying to help people with. But I am I wrong that I see the influence of curation in your own service that you have? I mean, there's aspects of it when I look at your graphics and design that you're looking at almost from a perspective of taking lots of different sources and then creating something finely tuned for that individual.
Yeah, that's definitely one aspect of our product. We draw a lot of inspiration from my experiences at Twitter, where you have this notification and subscription model. And so similarly, we see there's not really that kind of experience in the enterprise. There's no way for you to say, I don't belong to this team. I don't belong to the payments team, but I'm interested in receiving alerts when they do a new deploy or when they release a new feature, and I want to see release notes there. There's not really a way for either the team to emit that information and for people to opt in and subscribe. And I think that is causing a lot of communication gaps in large enterprises today.
One thing I'm curious about too, though, is your how you became a founder, and I'm curious about that story. Like, how did you get to this place where Transposit came to be?
I feel like it's very much part of my personality that I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And part of that was the fact that I've always been interdisciplinary. When I went to college, I was torn between doing a management degree and doing a computer science degree. I actually left development after 3 years at Apple to go study humanities at the University of Chicago. And when I came back, I went to work at Google and I did my 20% work under user research and getting to leverage some of the ethnographic field methods that I learned while I was at University of Chicago doing my master's. And so entrepreneurship always felt like the natural place to be because they wouldn't that's the only thing you can do that doesn't put you in a box. But I'm a very methodical and despite being an entrepreneur and a founder, risk averse. And so I jokingly say every company I've worked at, starting from Apple, was an order of magnitude smaller. So believe it or not, when I was at Apple, they were in thousands of employees, or tens of thousands of employees. At Google, it was thousands. At Twitter, I was around 100 when I joined there. I went to Sigma Computing, where I was a founding engineer, and then to become an entrepreneur in residence at Sutter Hill Ventures, and then founding Transposit. So I both always had this vision that that's where I wanted to be, but I took strategic steps. And I also, I think different people have different approaches to landing in entrepreneurship. But I took a very technical route. I understood that as an entrepreneur, the best thing I could do for myself is create a toolbox of different skills. So I spent a lot of time making sure I was up to date on AWS and cloud. I left Apple after a few years because I didn't want to know just client development and operating systems, but I wanted to learn the web. I left Google to go to Twitter because I knew that would give me much more operational hands-on experience. being at an early startup. And, I look at that time at Twitter as where we had no operations people, or we had very, very few operations people. So as a developer, you sometimes just had to SSH onto your engine Xbox and, debug what the proxy was doing. And that was part of life. But that gave me both the skill set, but also helped me understand the problem space that ultimately Transposit's tackling.
Tell me about those early technical leadership roles that you had at Apple or at Google. And how did you come into those roles, and how does it, affect how you work today?
So I actually didn't have what anyone would describe as a traditional leadership role at any of my previous jobs. So I was never in management, and I led my individual team sort of informally. But I think that the biggest thing that taught me, and having that be my pathway to being a founder, is I very much had to learn how to lead by technical influence. I think had I been in a different position and been an official tech lead manager or some leader in that sense with any real authority, I might have been able to lean on that to push forward my technical initiatives. But instead, I had to learn how to help people align on the higher order goals and see the pros and cons of specific technical approach that I was trying to champion.
So you didn't have that management background, but you did get asked to be in those roles, though, didn't you? I mean, not necessarily as a manager, but working with a team and leading a team.
Yeah, when I was at Twitter, I joined the user growth team, and I identified a problem space, which was email was an underserved part of Twitter's infrastructure. And I went out and built the notifications infrastructure for Twitter, which ended up serving email, push notifications, SMS, etc. As a result of having started that service internally, I then built a team around it. And part of, I think, the best experience of having done that was not just doing the technical architecture of the service, but having to operationalize that service with a small team. And I feel like that experience really helped me understand a lot of the pain points that I think a lot of operations people are facing today.
Tell me about those teams. Who are the people on those teams?
On my immediate team, it was engineers, but we worked closely, for instance, with the operations team that ran our MTA, which delivered email, and the operations and SRE teams that ran our services. And so we worked with all those different resources. We also worked with the user growth team, which is a more product feature driven team.
And how many people are you talking about here in total, or per team or such?
The teams are really small back then. So our service team had, at the largest size, 5 or 6 people. And so, I'd say the majority of my leadership experience has honestly been something that I've learned and grown through building Transposit itself.
Do you maintain small teams at Transposit?
We actually do. We have, I think, maybe around 15 engineers. And so we try to keep it lean. I think I'm a strong believer that the mythical man month is not a thing. And so, keeping a small, agile team that really understands the domain and everyone is on the same page, working towards the same goals, understands the vision, that honestly builds better products, especially in the early days of a company as you're trying to navigate the product market fit spectrum.
How has that, affected your thinking about past roles that you play, for instance, at Google or Apple or Twitter, where, you might have had conflicts as any organization does? I'm curious about, how you're looking, how you're trying to resolve conflicts. Maybe it's trade-offs in, your architecture, or or engineering issues that you're facing. What did you see at those other jobs that you've had before that you remember that take you back and help you think about where you are today?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I've learned from both my experiences at Google and Twitter and now building Transposit is the need to have a pragmatic lens and to understand what is the actual end goal that you're trying to accomplish, and how does the technology apply and the technical decisions apply to that. I think when I was at some of these other companies, technical architecture decisions often became questions around, is this language better or worse than that? It was about the technology itself. And I've come to learn that there really is no right or wrong answer. It honestly is a little bit of a philosophical debate in that sense. Now, if you talk about very specific goals you're trying to accomplish with the technology, that changes the discussion. And so you're able to root those technical decisions, take even something as simple as, what language do I want to use to build this product? You can have certain parts about the language itself, like I like statically typed languages. That is,
Right.
and these are the reasons, right? It gives you type safety. But you can also start factoring in things like, okay, does our operations stack service that language? Is there an additional operations load? What does hiring for that skill set for that language look like? And I think all of those factors matter just as much as, is this language actually better or worse than some other language?
Did you learn that? Did you have mentors who taught you that? Is this something you've learned through your humanities research, through your humanities pursuits? Uh, is this just accumulated knowledge? That's a pretty sophisticated way of looking at how you approach it, because you're almost looking at it, one topic from multiple kind of points of view, right? You're saying, yeah, it doesn't really, the technology doesn't really have as much, it doesn't matter as much. I mean, I don't want to belittle it, but also it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And it just seems like there's some nuance there.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that has evolved over time based off my experiences, but I honestly think some of it stems from my humanities background. So University of Chicago is a school of postmodern philosophy. And one of the critical lessons that I learned while I was there was how in the early days of anthropology, they looked at photographs and they said photographs are objective truths. And then they learned from that actually, modern day, we realize a photograph is a choice of a point of time and a choice of framing, right? The context matters. And so the same lens or the same thinking has to apply to technical decisions.
Okay.
I think it's really easy when I think about things like analyzing an engineer's performance reviews and how they're doing. People often look at someone's code in a silo and they say this code is good code or bad code or high quality. And in practice, that's almost a meaningless statement, right? There's always the context in the picture. If there was a deadline, I had a friend who worked on the Google Doodles project. So the code literally has to last a day for that doodle. So high quality is the code that gets the job done and gets it done in time, because one day late is worth 0. That's the right quality of code, and that is high quality code for that context. And, that's not true if you are building something that's part of the operating system that only ships once a year and, is hard to patch and hard to fix.
That's so cool. So it goes back to the robot almost, right? Like the anthropological view of the perfect objective uh, way to look at something might have been through a photograph, but it was learned that actually the photograph is actually quite subjective. And and when you look at the news from a robot's perspective, well, actually, there's lots of ways to look at the news, and the robot is actually being developed with a point of view as well. So, so there's some interesting kind of similarity there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I find this entire line of work super fascinating. It's actually what initially drove me to go get the humanities degree.
Huh. Speaking as a founder, one of the things that I found is in that, going from places like TechCrunch and then starting the new stack, that it was the context that was hard to get across when you're just reporting news, right? You couldn't really spend much time on, explaining something or trying to help people understand something, because it was more about, Sutter Hill Ventures has just funded a company, or this company has just received X million dollars in funding. And often those companies were actually really pretty interesting. I mean, I remember one of the companies that I wrote about at TechCrunch Disrupt was Foundation DB. And this was long before they got acquired. And, and I was like, oh, you're using, they just had a much more flexible way of looking at what they were doing. So that context it seems to be a theme here for you in your career. So what differentiates for you, the role of the technical founder versus, a founder who might be from a background in sales or in marketing? I love the Developing Leadership podcast, and they talk about this. I don't know if you ever listened to it, but for everyone out there, I would suggest it. But they talk about this a lot. I'm curious on how you think technical founders, really are differentiated from others.
So I think that the role of the technical founder differs depending on one of two classes of companies that you have. So there's a class of company that at the core isn't innovating on the technology, right? It's like technology is servicing, say, a new product idea, a new business model, a new approach. I think the role of the technical founder there is a little different than how I see it with companies in the category that Transposit is in, which is really about how can I use technology in a unique and innovative way to solve an existing business problem that I've identified. In that class of problems, where you are fundamentally at core a technology innovation, a different way of applying technology, the role of the technical founder is to really understand the pain point and really understand the market that you're going after, having a vision for how you plan to attack and approach that market, and all the way down to what is your technical architecture and your differentiator and why you are going to be able to solve this problem 10 times better than anyone else.
10 times.
Let's hope.
So engineers love to build things. So, what do you look for in your engineers that you have, that are part of your team? What are you thinking about? Do you want people who just love to build things? What are you looking for in their characters and their approaches? Are these people you've already known for years? I know engineering circles, especially in open source communities, can be, pretty tight, pretty close. I'm just curious on where you are with that and who you're looking for and, who you found and what you're trying to build.
I think that first and foremost, I look for people who are excited about how technology can solve real world problems. So I think that there's a category of engineers who are happy to build and play with technology, even if no person ever uses it on the other end. I know countless engineers that I've worked with in the past at big companies that actually didn't seem to mind if they were building a project and got to play on a new language and learn some new technology. And if the product got canned before it shipped, they weren't emotionally torn up about that. I was never that engineer. For me, I really want my code to have impact on other people. And I think that this is a really important piece because this means, especially for an early stage company, you have engineers who are willing to do the appropriate amount of engineering to test a new proof of concept, to validate the market, and not over-engineer for a product that may not be heading in the right direction.
So it's that balance that you're looking for, because you don't want it to be over-engineered, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I talked to an engineer early on in Transposit, and I explained to him that Transposit is this culture of pragmatism. We want people who will make that balanced choice on this is the right technical approach given what we're trying to accomplish right now. And this engineer had just left Apple and straight up said to me, you know what? I just think I'm not that pragmatic of a guy. I am happy to just play around and build something in a new language, even if it means 10x more operations costs because we don't have monitoring systems that support it. Because for me, I just like getting to play around with new technologies. And to me, that's also a sign of a perfect interview process. There's no trick question. I literally can just lay out, this is what I value in engineering and what we as an engineering culture want. And people can self-select in or out of that criteria.
Do you bring that approach into the rest of the organization, that culture of pragmatism, when you're thinking about not just being founder and CTO, but building the rest of the organization that goes with it?
Absolutely. We have core values, and culture of pragmatism for our engineering values is basically our number one value.
Culture of pragmatism. So how would you describe the culture of pragmatism? Is it solving those real world problems and doing it in a manner where you're not over engineering, but you're solving the problem effectively?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a framework for how we think about it, where we ask our engineers to first be able to state in a sentence or two what is the business problem that you're trying to solve, what's the pain or the customer challenge that you're trying to accomplish here, and as a result of that, list what are your solution requirements. From there, you can talk about your technical approach, and in that framework, people can often identify that, oh, I lumped in this feature or this additional piece, and it's honestly not necessary for any of the solution requirements that I've listed. And so even though that would be fun to build, probably something that we don't need to include right now.
Tina, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed kind of hearing your story. I particularly enjoy talking about blogging and Google News and that. And so I will remember this conversation for that, but also for your culture of pragmatism, that approach. I find it interesting to always hear founders talk about their core values. It's something that we believe in deeply here at the New Stack. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.